So hello everyone and welcome to the first RC class or RC lesson of our 100 Days to CAT program. In this lesson, I'm going to be discussing the very basic topic of how to read a reading comprehension passage. So reading of a reading comprehension passage is one of the most important steps or parts of solving CAT reading comprehension exercises. So I just wanted to discuss that what do we read and what do we keep in mind when we are reading the passage for the first time and what information are we supposed to take away from it. But before we look at the core part of today's lesson that say how to read and why to read a passage, I just want to get done with a few FAQs or frequently asked questions that students pose to me whenever they are faced with the task of reading a reading comprehension passage. So going through these questions one by one, let's figure out the answers for these very common questions that most students have about reading an RC passage. So first FAQ number one is how fast do I read? Do I read very fast or do I read slowly? How much time should I take per passage? So to understand that, I'll tell you that most of the times what I see among students is that there are two different types of readers. Either the readers are too careful or they are too reckless. So readers who are too careful are the ones who spend a lot of time in reading the passage and trying to understand every word, every sentence in every passage, every paragraph's meaning inside the passage. And these students take up an inordinately long amount of time to finish reading the passage. Or I've seen students who are in such a hurry to answer the questions that they just rush through the passage entirely. They skim through it. Maybe they even pronounce each and every word mentally, but they fail to register any kind of information while they're reading the passage. So these are the two different types of readers that I have seen as I have trained students for reading comprehensions over the last 4 years. Now, both of these approaches are absolutely incorrect. So what we are trying to do is that we are trying to be somewhere in the middle. So we are trying to take a middle ground where neither am I so careful as to try to understand every word, every sentence and every paragraph's meaning, nor am I so reckless that I do not register anything that's been given inside the passage. Right? So I'm not looking to read the passage in 7 to 8 minutes, nor am I trying to finish reading the passage within a minute. So the middle ground lies approximately between 3.5 to 5 minutes. This is how long it takes for us to read an average reading comprehension passage if we are trying to understand exactly that precise amount of information that we need to understand if I want to get the questions as answers correct. So this is going to be the ideal reading time, and we have to practice enough to figure out that how we can reach this particular timing, no matter which mock am I giving and no matter how difficult the passage is. Okay. Moving on, the second FAQ is what if I don't understand the meaning of something that I'm reading? So this is always going to happen inside CAT reading comprehension exercises because CAT RC exercises are from several different genres and topics. As I had discussed in the previous video of historical perspective to the VARC section, we have seen the reading comprehension passages are from management, are from sociology, are sometimes from philosophy, sometimes from psychology. Last year, a couple of passages were from journals and textbooks, from literature, from writing, from art, from architecture. So it is not possible for us to be an expert in the subject matter of each and every one of these topics. So there might always be a term or two terms or 3 or 4 terms that I do not understand inside a reading comprehension passage. And I will be faced with the dilemma as to what do I do if I do not understand the meaning of a term or terminology or even an entire paragraph inside a passage. Right? So then the answer to that is that if I come across such a section of the passage, I will simply ignore it. Ignoring it is the best thing that you can do to yourself. Right? Why? Because at that time, during the time of the paper, there is no way that you can suddenly develop a sense of understanding of something that you do not understand in the first place. You don't have any other resource for you to say Google or say go to a library and figure out what the meaning of any words, phrases, or paragraphs is. So we will read with complete concentration. And even if after that I do not understand the meanings of certain parts of the passage, the best thing that I can do to myself is ignore that particular part of the passage and understand whatever else I can understand in the passage and try to answer the questions based on that. If I dwell too long on say that part of the passage which I do not understand, then neither am I going to get a new sense of understanding of those words and terms and sentences and paragraphs. And what I will instead end up doing is that I will not be able to hit the 3.5 minutes to 5 minutes timer for finishing reading a passage. Right? So ignoring something that you don't understand is the best course of action that you can take. Moving on, the third FAQ is, should I read the questions first? Several times students come and ask me that, sir, do I need to read the passage first, or can I read the questions first and then look for the answers within the passage? So I have a very simple answer to this. Should I read the questions first? No. That is a short and sweet answer to this. You will never read the questions first. If you are someone who is taking CAT seriously, and if you feel that you have been preparing for CAT for quite a bit of time, and you have planning to give say 20-25 mock tests at least, then you are not going to read the questions first. People who try to read the questions first are those people who have actually resigned to the fact that they cannot solve reading comprehension exercises properly in the proper sense, how it is meant to be solved, and they're looking for shortcuts because they know that they are a failure, that they will not be able to pass the test that CAT is actually posing to them. So if you don't consider yourself a failure, if you consider yourself a serious aspirant, then you have to read the passage first. There are several reasons for this. I cannot get into the depths of each and every one of those reasons, but I will just tell you one major reason why reading the passage first is absolutely important. Because CAT reading comprehension questions are phrased in such a way that they test a student's ability to comprehend the message of the passage or comprehend the message of the author. So if I have to understand what message the author is trying to communicate to me as a reader, I will need to read the entirety of the passage to capture the essence of that message. If I do not understand that, then I will not be able to answer the tougher, the more complicated inference-based questions inside the paper. And if I'm only going to solve those questions in which the answers are directly present in the passage, then I will probably be at a 50 or 60%, which is not going to get me anywhere in terms of the score. If I need to answer inference-based questions and slightly complicated and tougher questions inside the paper, I will have to first understand what the author's message is that he or she is trying to communicate to me. And only then should I move on to the questions. Now, some of you might ask that, but sir, there might be certain questions which are asking me a particular answer which is directly present inside the passage. So then why not read the questions first and then go back to the passage and then read that passage afterwards, so that as soon as I come across the answers to those easy questions, I can pick that up and mark that as the answer and move on. You know, why I'll tell you that this is a very dangerous endeavor to take up is because if you read the questions first, then automatically and subconsciously our brain will only look for the answers to those questions while I'm reading the passage and forget to understand the passage as it is. So if I do not understand the passage, if I'm just looking for answers to questions inside the passage, my understanding of the passage will be extremely stunted. And that level of understanding will definitely not suffice if you want to get a good percentage accuracy and a good percentile at the end of the day when you're solving reading comprehension exercises. Right? So never ever read the questions first. Okay? If any CAT trainer tells you that you should read the questions first and then go back to the passage, then that person doesn't know what they're talking about and they have never taken the paper. And that is a given fact. Any renowned trainer who has taken the CAT examination, who understands the CAT paper, will tell you that reading the passage first is an absolutely essential endeavor that you have to take up while solving reading comprehension exercises. Fourth FAQ. How can I develop speed? So several times students say that, sir, I'm very slow. I finished reading a passage in 7 minutes only. How can I get down to 4.5 minutes time while reading a passage? So the simple answer to that is practice. Reading speed increases with practice. Now, do you read storybooks for that? Do you read news articles for that? I would say that no, at this point of time, reading all of those is not going to have a major effect on your reading speed. If you have had a historical reading habit, then your speed will be fast. But if you do not have a historical reading habit, then taking up reading right now about 3 to 4 months before the examination is not going to help you increase your reading speed at all. So what you're going to do is that you're going to practice reading comprehension exercises. So while you're practicing exercises, do not constrain yourself to say that I'm going to finish reading every passage within say 3.5 minutes. Don't do that. Instead, what you can do is that you can deliberately try to increase your speed in slow amounts. So if say suppose you're practicing reading comprehensions from some textbook or from some say topic-based tests which are present in your say testing portal, then time yourself and see that how much time are you taking in reading the passage itself. So right now, if you're taking about 6 to 7 minutes to read the passage, then you tell yourself that next time I'm going to try and deliberately speed it up to finish reading the passage within 5.5 minutes. From there, I'm going to graduate to 5 minutes. From there, I'm going to graduate to 4.5 minutes. From there, I'm going to graduate to 4 minutes. Expect a slow progression in terms of increase of speed, but speed is only going to increase with practice. And where you're going to specifically practice time management, where you're trying to say cram up as much information and as much speed into the short amount of time that has been given to you inside the CAT paper is while taking your mock tests. Mock test is where I have to deliberately speed up and try to always solve all 18 reading comprehension questions to begin with while I'm taking the mocks. If I can do that by the month of October, then that means that on the day of the examination, I will have no problems solving the entire VARC section of the paper within the given 40 minutes. For that, by the end of October, I should be capable of solving 18 reading comprehension questions every time I take a mock within the 40 minutes that's been given to me. If you're being able to solve only 3 passages now, slowly try to push yourself and keep on practicing. And with practice, you will be able to read the passages quickly. That is the only piece of information or only piece of instruction that I can give you with respect to increasing your speed at this point of time for CAT. Now, FAQ number 5. Several times students ask me that, sir, up to how many times can I read a passage? That I lose sometimes concentration in the middle of the passage. Can I go back and read the passage again? So like that, how many times can I read the passage? So for that, the answer is once. You are supposed to read the passage only once, and this is a habit that you need to drill into yourself. This is completely a question of habit. The reason why students sometimes not understand the passage in a single read is only because they are not paying attention to what they're reading. Their concentration levels are dropping and they're getting distracted. Now, getting distracted is normal, is common, will happen to each and every one of the students, because reading a passage is only staring at the screen, and since you're using none other of your mental faculties like calculation capability or logical reasoning, you're just reading. So our mind does tend to wander. So whenever it tends to wander, we have to take up the initiative and bring it back to the scope of the passage, and then we have to concentrate on the passage. And concentration, again, can be developed with practice. Okay. So every time you're getting distracted from a particular passage, then remember to tell yourself that I am thinking about something else. Let me take a pause. Let me come back to the passage and again start off from where I've left off. If I instead get into the habit of saying that, oh, okay, I got distracted, let me read the passage again, then I will never ever develop the habit of reading the passage once and understanding everything. So you have to force yourself to concentrate completely during the first read. And if you're finished reading the passage and after that you realize that, oh, I did not understand the passage, do not go back and say to yourself that it was okay. It is okay to get distracted. Let me read the passage again. As long as you keep on telling yourself that it is okay to get distracted, you will never ever figure out how to not get distracted. So enforce this rule that you are going to only read the passage once, and then with that level of understanding, you have to go to the questions. So as Kumar Dharmasena is pointing out here, he's an expert in VARC section. So remember, read the passage only once. Okay. Now comes the core part of today's video, which is how to read the passage, right? So when I'm reading the passage, what do I look out for? What do I keep in mind while I begin to read the passage, and how do I go about the reading process? So there are 3 steps to this. Okay. There is step 1, there is step 2, and there is step 3. The first step that I have to do is that while reading itself, in my mind, I have to segregate facts from opinions. When I'm reading a sentence, I should be telling myself, oh, this is a fact. Okay. Next sentence I'm reading, oh, this is an opinion. That opinion can be the author's opinion or can be the opinion of a person who is present inside the passage, but it is an opinion. So while reading itself, I need to mentally register which part of the passage is fact, which part of the passage is an opinion. Okay. Step 2 is I have to figure out while reading the passage how the facts and the opinions are related to each other. So I need to pay more attention to the opinions and what is the opinion and what role does the fact play in coming about with this opinion. Is the fact being given to contradict the opinion? Is the fact being used as a cause to come up with the effect, which is the opinion? Or is the opinion the cause with which the fact is the effect? So what is the relation between the facts and the opinions that I'm reading? This mental conversation and mental monologue needs to keep on going on within ourselves while we're reading the passage. And finally comes step 3. There is no step 3. So only 2 steps to reading. You're reading a sentence, ask yourself, is this a fact? Okay, it's a fact. Next, that's an opinion. How are those facts and opinion related to each other? That's it. If you read a passage like this, then you will do a really good job of getting a good sense of understanding of the passage. Right? So with this understanding, let's read a passage together. Okay. So let me point out in this passage, how will I go about reading it? Say, reading this passage. Okay. So first line says, in the late 1960s, while studying the northern elephant seal population along the coast of Mexico and California, Bernie LeBeouf and his colleagues couldn't help but notice that the threat calls of males at some sites sounded different from those of males at the other sites. So first two lines are complete facts. But what could they notice? They noticed that the threat calls of males at some sites sounded different from those of males at other sites. This is an opinion. This is a conclusion that has been reached by Bernie LeBouf. That was the first time dialects were documented in a non-human mammal. So till here is the opinion. Right? So when I pay particular attention to the opinion of Bernie LeBouf, his opinion is that the threat calls of males were different from that of males at other sites, and that's when he documented the first instance of dialects. So I know that the initial fact that what happened in the late 1960s was just to give us a background as to what helped this particular group of researchers come up with the conclusion that the dialects of certain males at some sites differed from the males of a different site, and that is how they came up with the fact that there are dialects in non-humans as well. Right? So first three lines of facts, last two lines are opinions. Okay, let's move on to the next passage or next paragraph. All the northern elephant seals that exist today are descendants of the small herd that survived on Isla Guadalupe. Again, fact. As that tiny population grew, northern elephant seals started to recolonize, forming former breeding locations. Again, fact. It was precisely on the more recently colonized islands where LeBouf found that the tempos of the male vocal displays showed stronger differences to the ones from Guadeloupe, the founder colony. So this sentence is again opinion of the researcher, that in the recently colonized islands, that's where he found greater differences or stronger differences in the male vocal tempos. So which means that the opinion is that in recent colonies, the dialects are more visible. Right? So this is just a fact. The fact is to tell us that how did the researchers go about doing this, and how did they figure out that where did the northern elephant seals recolonize. That has got no opinion of the researcher at all. So first part is fact, again giving a background for what did the researchers actually reach a conclusion with respect to the recently colonized islands. Next, let's read the third paragraph. Third paragraph says, in order to test the reliability of these dialects over time, LeBouf and other researchers visited Ano Nuevo Island in California. And these islands where males show the slowest pulse rates in their calls every winter from 1968 to 1972. So this is again fact. 3 lines of facts as to how did then LeBouf go about performing his research. And then comes his opinion, of course. What we found is that the pulse rate increased, but it still remained relatively slow compared to the other colonies we had measured in the past. So it was found that in this particular island, the pulse rate had increased, but it was still slower as compared to the remaining colonies that they had looked at in the past. Okay, from 1962 to 1978, it increased, but it was still slower than the other sites. Okay, that is an opinion. Okay, let's move on. Next paragraph says, at the individual level, the pulse of the call stayed the same. A male would maintain his vocal signature throughout his lifetime, but the average pulse rate was changing. So this is again opinion. Every individual's pulse rate remains the same, but the average pulse rate they actually found was changing. Right? Immigration could have been responsible for this increase, as in the early 1970s, 43%. Oh, again, this is an opinion. Immigration could have been responsible for this increase. As in the early 1970s, 43% of the males on Ano Nuevo had come from southern rookeries that had a faster pulse rate. Right? So this is a fact. From as in the early 1970s, from that part of the sentence is a fact. And that fact has been given to us to tell us that how did the researchers come up with the theory that immigration could have been responsible for this increase. Right? Because they immigrated from an island where there was a faster pulse rate. This led LeBouf and his collaborator Louis Petronovich to deduce that the dialects are perhaps a result of isolation. So dialects were a result of isolation over time after the breeding sites had been recolonized. Opinion, a result of isolation over time after the breeding sites had been recolonized. Right? Once it was recolonized, then the seals completely isolated themselves, and that is why they had a sense of a dialect in their voice. For instance, the first settlers of Ano Nueve could have had by chance calls with lower pulse rate at other sites where the scientists found faster pulse rate, the opposite would have happened. Seals with fastest rates would have happened to arrive first. So this is actually neither a fact nor an opinion, but they are starting off with for instance, right? Which means that they have made a point and they are trying to elaborate on the same point. So it's the same opinion which has been explained to us using an example. Okay. Moving on, last paragraph. As the population continued to expand and the islands kept on receiving immigrants from the original population, the calls in all locations would have eventually regressed to the average pulse rate of the founding colony. This is an opinion. Right? As more and more immigrants came in, it would all have regressed back to the original pulse rate of the founder colony. In the decades that follow, scientists noticed that the geographical variations reported in 1969 were not obvious anymore. In the early 2010s, while studying northern elephant seals, again, this part is completely, again, reaffirmation of the opinion that has been already presented by the researchers, right? That as time passed, there were no dialects, and it again regressed back to the original case. And that is what is being completely enunciated here, that later on some other research was performed by Casey, who noticed that, who confirmed that the dialects existed back then had vanished. Why? Because more and more immigration took place and it all regressed back to the original frequency. Yet there are other differences between the males from the late 1960s and their great grandsons. So this is a new opinion that Casey is giving us. Casey, the new researcher of 2010s, is giving us. Modern males exhibit more individual diversity and their calls are more complex. So this is one more opinion. While 50 years ago, the drumming pattern was quite simple and the dialects denoted just a change in tempo, Casey explained the calls recorded today have more complex textures, sometimes featuring doublets or triplets. So this is an opinion which is again substantiated by this fact, the fact which is present in the last 3 lines. So as soon as I start segregating opinions and facts, I start realizing the relations between them, and I start realizing what opinion each one of them is actually, each one of the personalities inside the passage is actually trying to communicate. And I will understand that all the facts are only to support the opinions. So now that I've read this passage like this, and I know that what all opinions are present in the passage, automatically my sense of understanding of the passage has expanded. What I do not remember though is the facts. I don't remember properly the name of the islands, the name of the researchers, the years in which the research was done, how the research was done. Maybe I don't even remember what exactly is the name of the animal, right? But I know that the opinions are about the dialects of a certain animal. What are the opinions? Opinions are that dialects are produced whenever immigration happens. It is more evident in the recently immigrated places. It is less evident in the older say colonized places, because what happens that with time more and more immigrants come in and all the dialects gets regressed back to the original colony. What other opinion is there? Last opinion is that compared to 1960s, today the different males have got more sense of individual diversity, and their calls have become more complex than what it was historically. So this has got nothing to do with dialects, but it's just a new point that the new research is finding out. So if I understand this much, that these are the opinions and all the other facts are only to support these opinions, then that means that I have a very good sense of understanding of the passage. So this is how I read the passage. When I read the passage, my eyes light up when I get an opinion and I skim through the parts which are facts. So that's why I am neither being reckless nor am I being too safe. So I'm being reckless when it comes to facts, when it comes to names of people, when it comes to years, when it comes to names of species. But I'm being very, very careful when I'm reading the opinions. So this is how you find the middle ground, between being a reckless reader and between being an extremely safe reader. And if you read a passage like this and you understand this much, this will hardly take you 3.5 minutes to finish reading the passage. This passage, by the way, was a CAT 2020 slot 1 passage. If you want to go back to it, you can actually search for it and you can reread the passage from the papers. Okay. Now, what do you do after finishing reading the passage? To ensure, to verify that you have read the passage properly, what you need to do is that you need to understand why do we read the passage. Right? So as soon as I finish reading the passage for the first time, if I have read it properly, if I have paid particular attention to the opinions and I've understood that how the facts led to those opinions, then I should be able to answer these 2 questions at least. First question that I need to answer is, what is the central topic of focus? So now that I've read this passage properly, I know that the central topic of discussion is dialects of elephant seals, right? It is basically about dialects of elephant seals. Right? That is a fact. That fact is being explored inside the passage. So the central topic is always about the facts. So which fact is central to everything that is being discussed inside the passage from the first line to the last line? What connects everything that's being discussed is the dialects of elephant seals. What is the primary purpose of the author? The author's purpose is to provide us details of one research done by a team which is headed by Leboeuf to show us that how do these dialects emerge and then how do they die out. So it is basically the purpose of the author is to present to us a sense of an analysis which analyzes and tells us that what could be the reason behind the emergence of dialects among the elephant seals and what is the reason behind them dying out later on eventually. So this is the primary purpose. And if I can describe the central topic and primary purpose of any passage as soon as I finish reading it for the first time, then I have done a good job of reading the passage, of understanding what the opinions and the facts are. With the answer of these two questions itself, you can answer most reading comprehension questions correctly and get a really good percentage accuracy inside the VARC section of your paper. Right? Apart from this, if I can also answer two more questions. Right? So two more questions. What are these questions? First question is, what are the secondary, tertiary, and other auxiliary purposes of the author? So basically, secondary, tertiary, and other auxiliary purposes is for what purpose has every paragraph been written. For example, when we read every paragraph, I discussed that what are the relation between facts and opinions in each and every one of the paragraphs. So if I can define that separately for every component of the passage, that from the first paragraph, this is what the author is trying to say. From the second paragraph, this message is what the author is trying to communicate. From the last paragraph, this message is what the author is trying to communicate. Then I have also understood the secondary, tertiary, and auxiliary purposes of this passage. For example, one auxiliary purpose of the passage that we have just read is to tell us about the modern research that the team headed by Casey has done. And she has also come up with the opinion that in modern day, individual seals have got more diversity and their language that they use is a bit more complex. So that is not part of the primary purpose because that is not something that ties up the entirety of the passage together. That is not central to the entirety of the passage. But it is also an opinion which the author is presenting to us from a different research. And that is a secondary purpose or an auxiliary purpose of this passage. So if I can also define the smaller purposes which are not captured inside a primary purpose of the passage, then I have a superlative degree of understanding of the passage itself. Finally, the last question that I'm trying to answer to myself, which is extremely important, is I'm trying to understand the attitude, the emotion, or the tone of the author. So the tone of an author is basically the emotion or the feeling with which the author deals with the topic at hand. So the tone of an author does not depend upon the content of the passage itself, but it depends upon the mood of the author or the feeling of the author. So the same content can be written by a particular author using multiple different emotions. Right? For example, in this passage, we have been presented a sense of an analysis. Now, this analysis has been presented to us by the author of this passage in a completely factual way. Right? The author does not give their personal opinions here at all. But the same analysis can be or could have been, say, told to us in a very happy fashion, that the author could have been very, very happy in telling us that, you know, that this research was great and I enjoyed reading this. The same way, the same content could have been presented to us, or the author could have even presented it sadly. Had the author been a biologist himself or herself, they might have said that, say, dialects, I thought would continue to exist in a population after it is developed. But it is sad to note that dialects actually disappear after a certain period of time. So the same research could have been presented to us in a sad fashion. So with what emotion has the author dealt with the topic at hand? If I can understand that as well, then I can actually relate to the passage in a much better sense. And I will be able to answer inferential questions with a much greater degree of accuracy. So if I can answer these two questions as well as soon as I finish reading the passage for the first time, then that implies that I have a superlative degree of understanding of the passage. And with this understanding, you should be able to answer about 80 to 90% of the questions of this reading comprehension exercise correctly. So while reading the passage, we have to remember that while I'm reading, I'm trying to segregate opinions from facts. And then as soon as I finish reading the passage, I need to take a step back, take a pause of 5 to 10 seconds, ask yourself these 4 questions, define the answers of these 4 questions to yourself. And then if you move on to look at the questions of the exercise itself, then you will find that you will be able to better answer the questions that are presented in front of you. This is what I wanted to communicate through this first lesson of reading comprehension as part of our 100 Days to CAT program. Hope this was helpful. If you like the video, then please click like and subscribe. And thank you everyone for coming, and have a good day.